Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Brian Thatcher, and welcome to Mercy Unbound. It's a series that aims to provide hope and avenue for healing, and one that will help you understand and then live the great mercy of God. With me today, I have a good friend, Ted Flynn. Now, we've had Ted on before. He's an author of numerous books. He's an executive producer of films. He's attended the University of Massachusetts and Amherst American University, the University of Freiburg, Switzerland, and the London School of Economics. This is a return visit, as I said, and today I asked him to come on the show and share with us his thoughts on his latest book, The Great Reset, The Globalist Plan versus Heaven's Victory. It's a very interesting read. It's available at sign.org, sign.org, and I suggest you get it. He's done an amazing job of bringing things together and providing answers that we're all searching for. Recently, I saw a poll that said 80% of Americans don't like the direction the country is taking, but we look at it and we go, what can we do? What can we do? Well, Ted, we're going to talk about those things today. Ted, what is the Great Reset, and how did this all come about? What does those words mean, the Great Reset?
Well, that's a very, very loaded question with profound implications, and it means different things to different people. But, there isn't anywhere you can go today and not hear the term the Great Reset, whether it's in academia, financial, government, media, or whatever, especially in technology. And it's actually, it's just simply two words is all it is. But here's what it generally means. All of the way through civilization, this is probably will be one of the longer answers to the question because it's so profound in its implication for every single person and what big entities are trying to accomplish. But all of the way, it essence goes back to every civilization in history. The American Empire is the 23rd great empire in world history. You could go back to the Mesopotamians, the Greeks, the Sumerians, the Romans, which lasted 454 years before it fell, starting with Romulus and Remus all the way to 454. So there was a much longer time of civilization where an empire ruled due to the evolution of civilization itself, of how slow things moved before the interconnected world. It's no way related at all to the scientific concept of evolution, but just the evolution of mankind historically. And so you could look at the French under the Sun Kings and under the Louis, especially Louis XIV, 15, and 16. And then you have the British Empire, where it was said the sun never set on the British Empire. And the reason they said that is that the British Empire had a presence of colonial inhabitation and conquest in every single continent. So the sun never set on it. And then you saw that the sterling was the reserve currency under the British. You had the Dutch sailing into New York Harbor in 1609 with the guilder being the reserve currency of the world, as they had been traders. So the evolution of this story is how countries, one empire recedes and another takes over for a lot of reasons. And in essence, the reserve currency of the world in the modern era has been the dollar, and before that it was sterling. But in 1944, at Bretton Woods, in July of 1944, the dollar became the reserve currency of the world, which gives that country the ability to pretty much print money with nothing really behind it. So what's happened in different times is the world reset. So if you take a look at, 1944, so let's take something like maybe 70 years, give or take, doesn't matter. But the United States has now been at the top of the heap, and the United States empire is eroding morally and economically very fast. So what happened, everybody knew, all of the allies knew there were 800 participants and the White Mountains of New Hampshire, meeting during World War II, that knew a country the size of Germany could not take over the world. So they couldn't beat all of the allies, and it was just a matter of time. So what happened is the dollar became the reserve currency. So what we're seeing now, due to this interconnectivity of the world economy, we're seeing a battle for who is going to control this new world. And basically, it's going to be, in the future, central bank digital control. And China's fighting for that position. Russia's fighting for that position. You have the Persian Gulf wanting to very much be a part of that, whatever this bucket's going to be. And it's going to be a drawing right that the IMF, the IFC, and the World Bank very much are a part of.
Now, Ted, you talked about all these earlier empires. What took them down? Was it from without, or was it from within?
Well, you know, that is probably one of the most discussed historical debates in the world of how empires rise and fall. And many, many people in the modern era know Edward Gibbon's The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire, which is probably about as thick as the old Euston phone book. And so what happens is there's two, I have a different opinion than a lot of historians do on that. You can see that all empires have the same elements, but historians tend to try to put it in economic, philosophical terms, where, in my opinion, it's the Lord who blesses a nation, who raises it up, and through extreme self-confidence that breeds arrogance, and where they no longer think they need God, it's the Lord who lets them fall. But the great historian Will Durant, who wrote The Story of Civilization, the great 11-volume set, that's probably, you know, I don't know, it's probably maybe 14 by 10 inches, 1,000 pages each. In his final book that he ever wrote, Lessons of History, which is only 100 pages long, Will Durant said, great empires do not end from conquering from without, but they commit suicide. And take a look at the American empire today. Look at the stupidity, the inane behavior, the arrogance of what we're doing. So we're in essence committing suicide. And exactly the same rise and fall of every single empire in front of us. But we have to remember that it's the Lord who raises up. And you can see this all over the Old Testament with Israel. As soon as Israel got a little too big for its britches, you know, the Lord came in and gave Israel sometimes a little spanking. And you can see that that is the entire history of the Hebrew people. As they began to get affluent and get more independent in their views, then the Lord he'd kind of go to the woodshed and get a little hammer and kind of pound on a little. And if they didn't, you know, as we can see in the under captivity under Nebuchadnezzar, he banished them to captivity. You know what? And it's fascinating. The sin that Israel was banished to captivity for is something that is so inane to us, and it's right in Jeremiah. The Lord banished his people for 70 years to captivity for something today that is so innocuous to us, to where we pay no attention, as they didn't observe the Sabbath. Can you imagine?
You know, it's interesting because we want to prosper. We want our children to have a better life. We all work so hard, and the fruits of that oftentimes are we get away from God. And it's just like the Jews, like you said, they'd be close to God for a while and then draw away, and then he'd have to be the loving father and straighten them back. It's an interesting thing. We're doing the same thing, aren't we?
It's identical. I call it the divine spanking. And I just see, you know, if you take a look, you get back to the concept of literally the Sabbath. Today, the Sabbath is basically a day of errands, If it's football season, the NFL today is on cable from 11 a.m. on a Sunday. And if you're watching the West Coast games, you may be getting off maybe a game that's available on the NFL channel till 2 in the morning, if you're Eastern time.
I'll share a little story. Years ago, our youngest boy, Christopher, was in a soccer tournament, and he was the goalie. And as it turned out, it was a three-way tie. So he had to come back a couple hours later for a playoff to see who would advance in the state tournament. Well, in the meantime, I told Chris, we're going to Mass. And at Mass, the priest is saying, trust in the Lord. You can do what you're called to do. And he looks at me, Dad, he's talking to me. Well, he went out after that. We went to Mass. We're the only one of the whole team that were going to church, right? And he goes out, and as the goalkeeper, they had these penalty kicks, and he saved the game. He made so many saves, and they're all saying, you got to go to church more often. And I'm going, I think the Lord's trying to give you guys the message, He blessed Christopher, but today's Sunday. Don't forget it. It's interesting.
Well, it's interesting. This is kind of a theme in the Great Reset of how people don't speak up. We're here. The church militant is a positive, virtuous term. When you don't teach your children the faith, you're one generation away from paganism and unbelief. And take a look what we've got today as a result of our generation not teaching their kids, and look what's coming along behind us. You're one generation of unbelief and not teaching. And it's funny, your soccer story, our son was playing on a baseball team. And it was an all-star team, and it was a travel team, and they were playing actually for the championship. And the coach, I don't know if you ever saw the book. It was some title like, everything that was wrong with me happened in Little League. Or remember that title 20 years ago, something like that. And there's another one, everything that happened to me was in Catholic grade school, that it was a mockery of the church that somebody spun off. And so our son was a good player, and he had hit a grand slam the day before. This isn't a boasting thing, by the way, but so his nickname was Grand Slam Dan. And so the coach, who is into Little League, and he's living vicariously through Little League, which is hard for me to believe as a person who played a college sport, of how that can ever happen. But the coach says, is anybody it's Saturday night, and the next game is the next day, which is a Sunday. So he said, is there anybody, it was practice the next day, I'm sorry. He said, is there anybody who can't make practice at 10 in the morning? So I raised my hand just very quickly. I said, I can't make it. And he said, any reason why? Like, I have to explain to him as an adult why I can't be there at 10 in the morning. But, I'm being cordial. He's a volunteer of his time for Little League. I get it. So I said very simply, yeah, we're going to Mass. And he had been brought up Catholic, and he goes, oh. And then he says to me, when do you think you can make it? I said, I'm not sure. We go out and have a family meal a lot and meet friends after church. I'm not sure. So he doesn't even know what to do with me. And so I said, we may be able to make it at 3, because I said, it's also the Sabbath. Now there's all of the other parents around, and nobody's speaking up. And because I'm not even sure they're interested anyway in what I'm interested in, but I just said, we can't make it. It's Sunday morning. We go to 10 o'clock Mass at St. Joe's. And, everybody knows it's the big church in our area. It's the biggest parish in the state at that time. But so a woman comes up to me after, and she says, thank you for saying that. And I'm thinking to myself, lady, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
And this is a theme in the Great Reset. We are here where we are today, of what's happening with all of the things in the schools, and with transgender, and all of this insanity that we're seeing. Last week, I was swimming laps in a local pool, and I jumped in the deep end, get the chill over, just jump in the deep end, come up. And so I push off the wall. And so I get to the other end. It's an Olympic-sized pool. And so I get to the other end, and I just look up, and I'm in the swim lane, and 2 people have got their legs in the water right on the other side of me. And I look up, and this is the God's honest truth. There's a guy with a beard with a two-piece woman's bathing suit. The guy has eyeliner, earrings, and a two-piece bathing suit. And how did we get here? I can tell you how we got here, because the church, in all of its truth, grandeur, and majesty, failed to speak up when we needed to speak up a generation ago. So this is now what we have, to where we have to change the narrative on what's going on. This is no longer unbelief. This is paganism.
You know, Ted, we say, how did things change so fast? Because it seems like they did, but I want to go back a little bit and talk about some of the people you mentioned in your book. One guy I find so interesting was Antonio Gramski. Can you share with the audience who he was and what his role was? And
Gramsci, for me personally, I mean, I know Machiavelli, I know the Prince. Machiavelli is considered probably, the father of political science. And Machiavelli said something through the Prince that, a lot of people, a lot of humanist secularists adopted that were very ambitious. He actually said, do whatever you need to do to get along with people so you can get where you want to go. A fascinating principle. You do whatever you need to do to appease them so you can go where you want to go and not offend them. So that's the genesis in the 16th century with Machiavelli. Then comes the next political genius of several hundred years, Antonio Gramsci. Antonio Gramsci was the co-founder of the Italian Communist Party. And when the Bolshevik Revolution took place in 1917, he decided that he wanted to go to Russia to see this experiment for himself. So we went in 1922 to see what was really happening. And while he only spent several months there, he came home because he felt the Communist Party would fail ultimately because the concept was too violent. Russia had a Christian soul, and it had 1,000 years from 888 to 1988 of Kiev Rus. So it was a Christian soul inside Russia. So Gromski went there, and he felt it would fail. And so when he came back, Mussolini actually was threatened by him, so he threw him in jail. So Gramsci wrote us. He died actually fairly young. If you go to Wikipedia, I don't think he was more than his late 30s, right off the cuff now. But I've written on him for over 30 years of what a political genius this man was. So when he was in jail, he wrote something called the Prison Notebooks. And the Prison Notebooks was a philosophy of embedding yourself in a culture, saying whatever you need to do using Gromski's principle, using Machiavelli's principle of the Prince. Embed yourself, bring other like-minded people in you, and bring other people to your way of thinking by bringing other people in the organization. And about a month or so ago, after the Dobbs decision of June 24th, I was with a whole group. We had a party, and there was a whole group of people that came, and I was talking to a second generation Intel. I won't mention the agency because there's 17 Intel agencies. But we were talking how the principles of Gramsci became so effective that were codified and perfected when Bill Clinton took office. So he served 8 years. Bush served 8 years because he didn't really have an ideology other than basically going along and empire building. And then you had 8 years of Obama. So you had literally since 1992 with Bill Clinton, where he spoke about, and we had agreed years in advance, that it was Clinton who embedded people in to agencies to begin to take over. And what happened is they brought all like-minded people in, and frankly, the liberals and the progressives and unbelievers have actually overtaken the largest institutions in America and the world, at least in the Western world.
Ted, you mentioned Gromski talking about communism was too violent and too quick. Didn't Gorbachev make similar comments about Russia, the empire collapsed because they did it too fast? And so isn't socialism in some ways equivalent to communism? It's just a slower.
Well, I call communism socialism in a hurry. I mean, the head of the Communist Party, I forget his name now, the head of the Communist Party in America in the 1930s said, we will do this, this, and this, and we will indoctrinate them through socialism. And then before long, they will all be communist and they won't even know it. The famous Gorbachev, Nikita Khrushchev speech said exactly the same thing. But Gorbachev said at the Presidio, had they gone slower, he ended up with an office in San Francisco at the Presidio. And he said, had we gone slower, we would have overtaken and accomplished more. But because it was too violent, we were unable to achieve our long-term goals. But I had spent 2 years in Poland after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and then 2 years in Belarus. And I had an assignment in an oblast called Gomel, which was above Chernobyl. And it was very, very clear, and Gorbachev said this also at the Presidio, it was actually Chernobyl in April of 1986 that brought the Soviet Empire down. In other words, they were exporting now nuclear fallout all throughout the West. And the West said, we've had enough. It's over. You're going to destroy the world with your incompetence. And Gorbachev said it was Chernobyl that was the linchpin in that entire process.
Now, a name that's thrown around frequently is Saul Alinsky. And many people maybe have heard the name. They don't really know what he did or what he wrote, how it relates to modern politics. Share with us who he was and what role he's playing today.
Well, this gets back into the great reset of people who have had an agenda that is anti-God. I mean, it starts with non-servium in the Garden of Eden, where a third of the angels fall from heaven. They fell from heaven and they didn't want anything to do with obedience to God's principles. So generationally, everything becomes a new ism of some sort, which is an anti-God principle of, I won't serve God, we're going to do it another way. Man's way, secular way, humanism, or through some other avenue to reach a solution that will never be good, never be true, never be right, but man's going to try it. And that's the history of our isms. But Saul Alinsky was truly, truly evil like Marx. And Alinsky was a social reformer. And just as a side note, Obama had used him as a mentor for all of his writings in social activism. But Alinsky, everybody knows of Rules for Radicals, but Alinsky's first book was actually called Revelry for Radicals. And then what he did, he refined that thinking in the sequel, which became Rules for Radical. And if anybody who's read it, he dedicated the book to Satan, the first great rebel, that he wanted to organize in hell. So it was an anti-God, anti-Christian, and the Catholic Campaign for Human Development was actually designed by Saul Alinsky in the Catholic Church through priests in Chicago area.
Now, didn't Hillary Clinton write her thesis in college on Alinsky?
Well, she kind of used the combination, in essence, Alinsky codified the rules the way Bonaventure did, frankly, for St. Francis. And I forget the saint priest that did it for the Dominicans after, Raymond of Penafort or something. And so they get somebody behind him who codifies the thinking of their original rulers for good or bad. But Alinsky, in essence, codified all of his thinking for a social action plan. So somebody could literally go to the book and see how to follow it if they weren't creative enough. But he gave a blueprint. And the Democratic Party has actually been using that playbook in the United States of infiltrate from within. And the Democrats, they haven't been negotiating in good faith. As soon as they get something, as soon as they get a large victory or a Pyrrhic victory, they're coming for more. Enough is never enough. They have not been negotiating in good faith. And frankly, they've been lying through their teeth now for several generations on what their plan is. For instance, people talk about the Democrats don't have a plan for the southern border. No, you don't get it. The plan for the southern border in the United States is an open border. That's the plan. And they've been lying about it all of these years. That is their plan, an open border. And they've been doing it through all sorts of other social mechanisms. That's only one of the more obvious. They've been doing it to break the system. Why? Because for a reset, you need to break the existing system, because the left and the progressives, the ungodly, they believe the United States Constitution is a failed document. They believe the Bill of Rights is incomplete and it should be a fluid movement, and it was written for the era then. And they also believe that Christianity doesn't work. And so the very institutions that built the West, they want to do away with.
You talk about infiltrating and embedding, and in the government, you know, a phrase we hear frequently is the swamp. It's hard to get rid of these guys, isn't it?
Well, you know, there's something, I don't know, you know, you've been in Florida an awful lot of years, but are you familiar with the term senior elective service in the United States government?
Yeah, the seniors, yeah, elective service, I have. That's an old term. Haven't heard that for a while.
They're called SESers. They're in essence the shock troops. They're people who are appointed, and there's something called a Schedule C. People have to understand how broad and pervasive this is, that they have embedded people in positions. A Schedule C, or something that comes from something called the Plum Book. It's a light lavender color of a book that every president gets to make appointments, which is called a Schedule C. And after that, all of those people are usually fired. But what you can also do when a person is a Schedule C, which is a higher pay scale, a lot of them know that they would like to stay in government because the perks are just so good. The benefits are just off the charts, because a lot of government employees are now the elite employees in the American system. But what the SESers, they will, as a Schedule C, they'll appoint each other to SES, and you can never be fired. The pay scale starts at 135,000 to something like 202,000. And there's steps inside this. There's 8,000 of those people in the federal system that are totally embedded, and they've been embedded, and you don't bite the hand that feeds you. So these people know how the system works through administration after administration, and that's why they can block things for any president they don't like. They can just gum up the works. The SES are the shock troops. They're the Gestapo of the American government.
You know, so we've got that going on almost insidiously, and then yet that's in contrast to God's plan. And I'm thinking of the words, the Blessed Mother, I have a great plan for salvation, and I come to tell you that God exists. Look at people like Maximilian Kolbe, for instance. Share and contrast him to Saul Alinsky.
Well, you know, now you're talking a contrast of light versus darkness. I mean, it's not even a 180. You can't even put it in with a metaphor or any sort of contrast. Saul Alinsky was evil in flesh to basically disrupt a system and to basically destroy it from within because of his atheism. Because why? It's the Holy Spirit that gives light. And when there is no Holy Spirit, it's hard for a mind to be coherent and clear. And so, but saw Maximilian Kolbe saw in 1917, literally when he was there as a friar and he was with his confreres, that he saw the Masons marching in the streets of Rome. And they literally had a sign that we would overtake the Vatican in 100 years. Their goal was to overtake the Vatican by infiltration from within. So now you're into, if you were to go to the greatest legal pundits, political pundits on TV, and you can name whoever you like, and if you were to go and ask them and say, what is the enemy believers are fighting? Who is your enemy? Do you think anybody could tell you that what the enemy is? I don't. The enemy of the Catholic Church is Freemasonry. They're the ones who have been embedded, and the genius is nobody even knows they really exist. It's just a term. I've been speaking on it till I'm blue in the face, and I'm pretty much ended on it now, because it's just a word to these people, but they're so highly organized. And if you want to go back to the origins, of which I did a major article in the book on it. In 1717, several disparate lodges of Masons got together in London, where they all took the name of the pub that they met at and drank at. That became the name of their lodge. So they began to, in 1717, organize as a much more powerful group. And Masonry then was back all of the way to the principles of Solomon, where he had his builders for the temple, and being the power behind the scenes for Solomon as the builders and the organizers that Solomon used. But this then, in 1717, they began to organize, and that became the Grand Lodge of London. Now, 1717, so they began to meet, and they knew they had to do away with monarchies. And they felt the strongest of that time was the French monarchy. So they began to work. And, Satan is out to kill, destroy, and steal, where Jesus said, I come to give you in life and give it more abundantly, John 10:10. Think of those three words: kill, destroy, and steal. Satan has an agenda the same way heaven has an agenda. And there's plans, as you just said. I have a great plan for the salvation of mankind. Heaven has a plan, and that's why the book is actually very, very upbeat, because the plan is being put in place. Now, what are we watching now? We're watching the pus come out by the bushel basket. Everybody now sees, if they're paying attention, they see the evil all around us, whether it's academia, government, entertainment, every industry. You can see the corrupt nature of it. And so they had, in 1789, they realized that the Masons could not penetrate the Catholic Church. Why? Because it was too big, too powerful, too organized, too moneyed, and too many faithful to it from within. So what did they do? They infiltrated from within, and they began to bring it down there. And so liberty, equality, and fraternity was 1789. People talk about the Bastille and what a great event that was. That's simply their symbol. There was something like 15 people freed in the Bastille that day. It was very, very tiny, but it was about taking down the monarchy. And now fast forward of how we can see that today. Now that was, we're now 305 years of organization with people since 1717 to modern day America. And the rest of principally the West, of how they've infiltrated from within and promoted from within. And it's in Freemasonry is actually, it's an easy career. The Blessed Mother calls it easy careers.
Ted, I'm going to ask you to clarify something for me. I don't know much at all about Freemasonry. My grandfather was a hardworking guy in a little town in Ohio, German immigrants, his parents were, and my dad was a convert. My grandpa was a United Brethren back then, and he was in the Masonic Lodge. in a little town, and he used to go down to the lodge. I don't really believe that they had any big discussions on anti-Catholicism in that little town. My grandpa had no theological training, and he was just a good guy, loved to watch baseball. And near his death, my dad told me that grandpa really wanted to become a Catholic. So are we talking about a sect of these Masons in these local areas all over the country that move up their different categories or something? Sort this out for me.
Well, first of all, it's a very, very broad subject, and I'll try to just deal with it, at 10,000 feet. There are different levels, and you do different things. But by and large, the way you're talking about your grandfather, it was a fraternal lodge. It was a fraternal club. I know a man here in Washington who I'd even played golf with in the past. And when he got a very, very prominent position, which I'm not going to say what it was, but it was a very, very prominent position, he was advised for him to continue to advance in the organization, he should join the lodge, which he did. So there's different levels of this to where, okay, through the Catholic network that we're a part of, we have thousands of relationships, and we know hundreds of the same people, you and I. So, we can call on each other for advice and help at different things. And so what happens is it's a fraternal club to where they begin to help each other in their careers. It's why they join it. But as you keep going up and you get into a lot of the writings, that's where it becomes much more nefarious and insidious and frankly evil. But most people don't get to that, but they're smart enough to join it because it helps their careers. And let's face it, and so this person ended up joining it. And the positions that the Masons want more than almost any other positions is they want to have the chief of police involved with them. They want the head of the fire department with them. I've had priests personally tell me that Masons came to them. They had charisms. They had a savoir-faire about things, being able to dialogue, and they were men's men, and they had gifts. And I've had two priests tell me that Masons approved them and said, we can help you rise in your career if you join. It's a buddy system where they help each other. It's frankly just that simple. And that's how they embed. And you don't go against each other. It's not, it supersedes all politics. It supersedes being a Democrat or Republican. And you only go so far in a lot of organizations unless you join. So this is part of a great reset. There's a globalist plan with people like the World Economic Forum, where they have it with big tech firms. And then you also have what Heaven's plan is. I think the ultimate reset is going to be the warning of Garabandal, the warning in the Great Miracle.
I'm glad you brought that up. I had looked at that recently, and a lot of the messages, don't they tie into Fatima? And we got to get back to but it goes back to God. We got to get back to God.
Same thing. I mean, the Blessed Mother appeared. Of all of the apparitions in world history, my pet is Garabandal. And the two largest chapters in the book are on the warning and the miracle. And I even just did a little booklet on it called The Secrets of Garabandal. It's being printed now. It's a little pocket vest thing. You can read it, in a couple of hours, done. And so, it's dense, but Garabandal, the message, again, it couldn't be more simple. The main messages of Garabandal, where the Blessed Mother appeared 2,000 times to 4 young girls, 11 and 12 years old in northern Spain, are about two things principally: the sacredness of the priesthood and the Eucharist. What's so radical about that?
Yeah. Well, as Eucharistic apostles, that's part of our mission statement. And in this time of Eucharistic revival, and again, we're getting away from that. People don't believe in the real presence. And you mentioned the warning. Isn't that similar, analogous to the illumination of the of the conscience?
It's got several words. There are several names for it: the illumination of conscience, the correction of conscience, the warning, or in Spanish, the aviso. But it's got different, a lot of people would equate it to a near-death experience, or a life after death, or a life after life, whatever you want to call it. But it's basically, it's going to be God's ultimate act of mercy, where we see our soul as God would judge it. I don't know if you ever remember the name Dick Bingold, who we gave him like the 3-foot Medjugorje statue that he traveled around the world with, and he ended up as a missionary in South Africa. Do you remember the movie not The Great Escape? There's one with Popeye Doyle, dealing drugs in New York City. What was that again? 1972 or 73, Gene Hackman. But anyway, this guy was Popeye Doyle's gumshoe partner. And it was about all of the drugs coming in from Marseille into New York
Yeah.
at that time.
Was that Al Pacino or?
No, it was Gene Hackman and some Roy Scheider, but I forget the name now. But Dick Bingold had been, in his own words, this was his testimony. He's died, so we're not vilifying a dead man, because this was his great testimony. He hadn't been a good man. He hadn't been a good father, a good husband. When he went to Miami and started working with the Drug Enforcement Administration, he got into that lifestyle, boats and drinking. Dick Bingold had the warning. Now, he was about 6'5", probably 280, a big guy. And Dick Bingold spent 5 hours on his kitchen floor and couldn't get up because there was such remorse and tears. And he saw this. I put him in a film I did, and it had a big impact on a lot of people with his story. What you do is you see your life. It's kind of like flipping through your iPhone and looking at pictures. And so the sins that are very, very serious go slower, and the other sins go a little faster. And it's like a moving picture. And at the end, you have no recourse. You have nothing to defend yourself with, because you have just seen the state of your soul as God would justly judge it at judgment. That's how great this act of mercy is going to be. And I do believe we're getting closer. I don't know the date. I don't predict. I've never predicted a date, which is why I've never been wrong, because I'm not one of these people. It's next year or next month. But we do know that the data points is that we're getting closer, but there's still some things that are not met yet prophetically.
In your book, Ted, The Great Reset, the Globalist Plan versus Heaven's Victory, that's available at sign.org. You do mention the quote from Jeremiah 29:4-14. Share that with us, and why this is an important quote to you.
I had been searching, we've all known what's happened since COVID. I'm all around me. I don't know what you're seeing, but I suspect it's the same. We're seeing chaos. We're seeing the banal, the inane, the insipid. We're seeing stress, anxiety, anger. People are very, very short-tempered now. They're just not willing to listen to people. And when they don't like when something's said, because you can be in a conversation right now with somebody for a very, very short amount of time that you don't know. And in just a matter of many minutes, they will tip where they stand. And if you engage them for a contrasting point, they'll know where you stand. It's never been this sharp. It's never been this sharp a division immediately. So I've been trying to come up for years of how the believer should actually, of how we're able to respond in a time of, frankly, institutional free fall, where a lot of our systems of governance are having such struggles right now to perform as they were originally designed. Now, you can hardly go anywhere and see things working very efficiently like they did X number of years ago. And it's not that America was ever perfect. I'm not throwing a flag up here that America is without water when here. But we have a situation where people are stressed. They're anxious, whether it's inflation or another 25 reasons of what their kids are being taught in schools, with the abomination of that stuff they're teaching and allowed and actually promoted. And so I found the answer for me, the best I could come up anywhere in scripture, is how to deal in stressful times, is Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 4 through 14, 11 verses. It's actually very, very quick to read, of where Jeremiah was told by the Lord that to tell the people of Israel they were going to go in exile because of disobedience. As we said to something today, what? Disobeying the Sabbath, which happens to be one of the commandments, by the way, and not a suggestion. And so Jeremiah tells the people this: here's how you're going to deal in captivity. Think of us coming out of our house and seeing a Russian or Chinese soldier telling you what to do and showing you your papers, telling what you can eat, where you're to work, the hours and what you can do. So Daniel is a member of that group, which was the origin of the Magi, of how he got people around him like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego as thinkers for the community. And so the Lord said to the people in captivity, plant, harvest, have children, give your daughters away in marriage, give your sons away in marriage, and stick to the rubrics of your traditions and your faith. There's your answer. It's like me coming up, swimming laps the other day, and I see a guy in a woman's bathing suit with a beard. It doesn't get nuttier than this. They walk among us, and it's hard to even talk to them. They're so far gone mentally in their belief system. So what does that mean for us today? Get up, stick to the rubrics of your faith. You may not be planting and harvesting as an agrarian society, but get on your computer, do your work, do your chores, pay attention to your spouse, pay attention to your kids, pay attention to your grandkids. Same formula today. Now that's from God's lips to the people of Israel, to their ears through Jeremiah. It doesn't get any better than that of how to deal in stressful situations.
For me, the saying, Jesus, I trust in you, becomes all that more significant when we think of what could lie ahead. And so we need to hold on and grab the cloak of the high priest behind me, Jesus Christ. And Ted, I want to thank you for joining me today on Mercy Unbound. Again, a great discussion on the Great Reset, the globalist plan versus heaven's victory. And we just need to stay close to Jesus and Our Lady, live a sacramental life, and pray. But Ted, thank you again, people. I hope you enjoyed the show. Get Ted's book. Check us out. Please subscribe, share these shows with friends, and we hope to see you next week on Mercy Unbound. Thanks again, Ted.
Thank you very much. I always enjoy it.
Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for the video portion. The podcast can be heard at anchor.fm/drbrian, Bryan Thatcher, Thatcher, and on all the major podcast forums. I would love to speak at your church or conference, and please consider supporting our efforts to spread the truth to a hurting world. Thank you again. And for more information, go to the website at drbrianthatcher.com.